Hi, my name is Francois, and this is Super Teachers Unite, the show dedicated to finding out what it takes to teach like a superhero. Now, all of us had that favorite teacher when we were at school, and they were very influential early in our lives, and we remember them fondly. Now, in every episode, I'll interview business leaders and other super teachers so that they can share the stories about the super teachers in their lives that were so influential on the successes that they made of their lives. Now, they'll share stories from the classroom, but as well as the boardroom. In every episode, our guest stories will assist us in finding out, especially if you're a super teacher, what it is going to take to improve your practice. And if you're a business leader, how will you improve your people, your processes, and your profits? Now, if you need me to assist you in finding out how you can teach like a superhero, check out our website at staysuper.co.za. In today's episode, I speak to Jeff Lodge, who is a former teacher turned entrepreneur, and he is the founder of Come Alive Creative, which is a company that focuses on strategically producing podcasts for businesses and schools so that they reach their objectives. Now, it was amazing speaking to Jeff, seeing that both of us come from a similar background and both of us moved into entrepreneurship. And speaking about the things that really matter to us, in number one, creating value-driven schools and how he goes about enforcing that in his company or instilling that in his company, and how we can do that in schools when we hire teachers or when we hire people to work in our businesses. And then, of course, we speak about Jeff's favorite teacher and some of the moments from when he was a teacher. And then, very importantly, we share why we think every single school should have their own podcast. I hope you enjoy this one. So Jeff, the audience now knows you from the introduction we've done, but I'm sure our teachers are going to stalk you to find out what it is that you do. On which platforms would you say would be best for our audience to go and stalk you on?
I would say LinkedIn. I won't lie. I don't like any of the platforms. All of them annoy me, but LinkedIn has been like my personal vocation for as of late, and I've been putting a lot up there about podcasting and different things. And so if you want to actually interact with me, that'd be a good place. Otherwise, just any of my websites, company being Come Alive Creative, or personal, just jefflarge.com.
Okay, that's also, I love LinkedIn, and I've seen your presence on LinkedIn, the posts that you make, especially from a podcasting background. It's really been assisting me a lot. So thank you for posting that content. But
Absolutely.
Jeff, we ask all of our guests the same question, because our mission is to try and figure out what are these traits that make super teachers super. Please tell us about a teacher that really made an impact in your life when you were at school.
Yeah, I thought about this question in advance. One that stands out to me was it was actually my capstone teacher in college. It was my capstone in my bachelor's degree. And it was a literature class, and it was on critical theory. And so it's all around like you can take a single instance, apply a different lens on it, and how it changes the perspective of whatever's going on. And so one thing might be like a local town carnival. And if you look at it through a Marxist lens, it's going to seem one way. If you look at it through a capitalist's lens, it's going to seem another way, and all of those kinds of things. But what was different about this gentleman is like, I'm trying to think of the actual traits. He like the obvious thing is that he cared. Like he cared about each of us as individuals. I spent time with him outside of the class, like in a pseudo mentorship, at just different times, like just kind of dropping by his office and talking about life and in different things, from a professional side, from a personal side. And then even like some of the other stuff, he didn't mind taking risks. Like he did interesting things. Like he was kind of a more prestigious professor, but at the same time, like he's took an entire like semester off. He took like one of the professor sabbaticals in order to study poetry and write his own poetry, and just did things that were like mildly out of the norm. I think in order to just continue completing himself as an individual and trying to become more whole. if that makes sense. And so those are some of the characteristics and reasons that at least I remember.
So there's a few things that you mentioned there that really resonate with me. And number one is this concept that this individual still had their own life, that they weren't so focused on their professional life, because I think it's easy for teachers in general to let the job like swallow you whole. Like everything you do is just teaching. The friends that you keep are other teachers, so when you spend time together, you like tend to speak about like teaching and the kids and what happened in the staff room. But having your own life apart from your professional life, I think that's extremely important. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would 100% agree. I think that's true of most professions. I think, especially when you start to move in like the hustle culture, you easily can drown in that type of a thing or like lose yourself in it if you're not safe. And then even as I think back to teaching, it's so it's funny. Like this is such a throwback. I don't know what exactly we said in the introduction, but just like I mean, I'm what is it? 2014, I think, is when I left teaching. Like I'm still teaching, but formally teaching in a classroom setting. It was 2014. So some of this is like the throwbacks, but I personally wasn't really good friends with anybody that I taught with. Like I worked well with them and we made up teams to get things done. But you'd have certain people that'd be on staff and they'd kind of be like best friends or whatever. And I just remember on Fridays, teachers going out and like whatever, going out to the local bar and just kind of relaxing, unwinding, talking about the crap that happened during the week. And I just had like no interest in any of that stuff because I had a family. Like my family was younger at that time. I think we just had my son at that point, and my own personal interests, like kind of starting to do the business stuff on the side around then. We had a board game publishing company that I was doing like near the end of my teaching career on the side, and um, it it would have been really sad if the only thing I was doing was teaching and talking about teaching and hanging out with teachers. Not to say that I didn't love it, but if that was the only thing that made me me, yes, that would be pretty sad.
But then what happens is you start becoming almost one dimensional. um, what I love doing is like taking my interests from outside of the classroom and meshing it into my lessons, because the content is important, but the kids like who deliver the content. So if
Hmm.
you start bringing in personal stories, or like from teaching biology, spending time, because we've got the Cradle of Humankind in Johannesburg, where I stay, is like 30 kilometers away from where I stay. So you
Hmm.
can talk to them about like making the content real, because you've got other interests. If you're just in teaching the whole time, what else do you have to bring into the conversation?
Yeah, yeah, it's hard. There's a professional, there's a writer that I like a lot. His name is David Perel, and his newsletter on Mondays is always Monday Musings, and he just like the one that I read this week, he was talking about how he learned some new writing skills from principles they use in the South Park episodes, like the South Park cartoon, and like stuff like that. And it's like those kinds of things I just find so intriguing because I'm a really big believer that uh, like you get the people that kind of stay in their lane, and that's good. Like niching down, there's nothing wrong with that, and you can learn a lot when you focus. But at the same time, I feel like we miss things, and it's part of the reason I know that we were introduced to each other, just because like the similarities, but also the differences in our background. And for me, like even we had you on my podcast recently to look at kind of business from these different angles, and then happens to be one of those lenses being education, or for a teacher to be looking at education through another lens of like being able to think of it as like we're talking about business owner, or as rock climber, or as like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or like whatever your interest is. Definitely I think that can really round you out as a person and a leader.
I mean, just as an example, you just mentioned a newsletter. Another newsletter that I like reading is Seth Godin's newsletter, and he like publishes like daily, or then just skips a day or two. But in I think a recent one, he just I can even see the thought process. Like he was standing there with an avocado in the kitchen, and he was like, "This can become a newsletter topic," and he compared the ripening of an avocado to spending time in person or spending time online. He's like, an avocado is like ripe like for 1 second of its lifetime. Before that it's too hard, and after that it's like brown. It's like, are you really going to waste that perfect avocado that when we spend face-to-face in-person time with each other talking about nonsense? Like, come on, man, use your ripe avocado moment. And I mean, just like having ideas like that and bringing that into your professional life, it creates dimension to your character. And I believe teachers should definitely do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, one of the other things that you mentioned that this super teacher of yours did is that they spent time with you. Of course, you said they cared, but they spent time with you outside of the classroom. So it was for professional reasons. You said that you've got this mentorship relationship with them, but also on a personal level. And that, I think, is one of the major traits of a super teacher, is that the job isn't just a job for you. It's not just that I'm going to rock up and earn my salary, but that we actually start building these relationships and almost act like I don't want to say therapist, because you need there's baggage with that, but this counselor or this caring friend that I know for teachers in my life that really helped me through a lot, just because we had these personal conversations. So I think that was absolutely valuable that you mentioned that your super teacher spent the time getting to know you personally and professionally.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I mean this in the appropriate sense, but intimacy comes with time. Like, I mean, think of your best friends, think of family members. Like, it's through the time that we spend with them that we're able to strengthen our relationships in general. And teachers have the capacity to do that, I think, through like extracurricular activities, whether it be sports or other things, and making it a point to go to kids' performances or whatever, like when we're kind of in normal routine. There's a lot of opportunities to do that. And I think it makes a far greater impact than we ever realize. And it's only through, like, for especially if, say, for the audience that has been teaching for a while, it's like when you put several years in and you start to get letters later of kids graduating and like reaching back out to you and telling you how big of an impact you had, it's like you don't realize it until those moments. And so it is really important.
Yeah, teaching is one of those professions. They say that teaching is like planting a seed of a tree under whose shade you will never sit. And
Hmm.
those rare moments occur when the tree actually provides you with some shade. They come back and they say, look at how great my life turned out, or you inspired me to do the following. And I think my favorite thing is when I meet kids that I taught, is they'd say, sir, I remember this specific lesson or this specific content that you taught me. And I mean, that just absolutely makes my day when that happens. Did you have any similar situations happening to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint. What would be? Give me a little more structure, because I could go a lot of different directions.
So there's one example on my side is for biology, we do this thing about parasitology and how you should be careful of this might not be appropriate content, but hey, let's go for it. With parasitology, there are some worms that actually lay their eggs around your anus. And if you were to scratch your anus, the eggs will get under your nails, and that's one way in which it can spread. Now, during the class, I mean, there's certain, I know it's great content. Everybody everywhere who are not biologists are going, what did you just say?
I'm waiting. I'm really hope there's a redeeming point coming up here.
I'm let's see if I can redeem it. That you can present that content in various ways, and I think there are the boring ways of doing it. But I created a song around it. Now, it doesn't make sense in any other language except, I know, right? I love your expression. I created a song around it. We've got these traditions in our schools where during athletic season, that the kids who don't participate in the actual sport, they remain in the stands and they like sing songs, and it's like this like spirit with everybody. And then there's this specific like routines, like hand clapping routines that people do, and then there's songs that go over them. And I managed to take one of those and like juxtapose the or superimpose the content onto one of the athletic songs, and made the content like, I hate using the word come alive in this sentence, by singing the song. And when I meet the kids still, they would sing the song to me. And I mean, they are now, I mean, that's 20 years later. They'd still remember the song and repeat the song to me. So, I mean, that kind of thing really, like, that makes it worthwhile, like being the crazy teacher and singing about like eggs around the anus. But I mean, that's the kind of thing I'm not saying you should go that extreme though. But like, what did you have encounters with kids afterwards that really made you think like, yes, this made that instance worthwhile?
That's too funny. I definitely have no eggs around the anus songs that I can recall. But like I mentioned, I taught literature for a long time. And one of the things that we had to cover, I was teaching middle school. It was like 7th grade here in the States. And we had a big poetry unit. That was like one of the things that we needed to go over. And so it was all types, like from sonnets to, I'm super rusty now, but all the types. We had like maybe 14 different types of poems that we would do. And we spent it lined up that it was like during poetry month for, again, in the States. And then we had, I don't know what it was, like a month or so that we're working on this, and it all crescendoed to converting my room over into a poetry lab, or like an actual coffee house. And so like I borrowed all this stuff, and I was like the barista for the day, and I brought in a bunch of my, because I'm a musician too, and so I brought in a bunch of my equipment. So we had like a microphone and actual lights, and made the front a stage, and kids were getting like hot cocos and teas and coffee and all this different stuff, and they'd present these poetry books that they were working on for like a month. And it was so cool because it was near the end of the year, and you know how kids are, like they don't always get along or everything, but they all like respected one another during that time frame. And so I'd hear stories about that, and then it was even like I found some old journals of mine from when I was their age, and like poems that I wrote, and I would read them to them and that type of a thing. So that's one that was a big one for me. And then there was another one, a lesson that I've gotten definitely people have said on several occasions where I had to teach them like point of view and tone of voice, and some of those types of things, and like understanding your target audience. And so I was notorious for several years, like when smartphones were like newer and all the cool people had them, I still had a flip phone because I just didn't care. And the kids would always harass me because I was like the dumb teacher with the smartphone, like, Mr. Large, when are you going to get a smartphone? And I picked a day, and I was like, okay, guys, you got to shut the door. And so they'd shut the door, and I'm like, I really think it's time for me to get a new phone, and I don't understand anything about it. Can we watch some commercials and you guys tell me which one to pick? And they're like, yes. So they all thought I was like really picking a phone, and we'd watch all these different commercials, and I'm like, so who do you think that one's for? And we'd watch like the Cricket or whatever, which is like for the like little kids it only has like the oversized buttons, or old people. And then we'd watch the new hot one for the iPhone, and like all these different scenarios. And then it would be years later, they were like, you never bought a phone, did you? And I was like, no, I didn't. I tricked you into learning everything I wanted you to that day. Eat it. Like that kind of thing.
But that's absolutely brilliant, because the kids, they participated in a lesson, a pre-planned lesson, without them knowing that they were actually learning something. And I think in
Yeah.
that just breaks the mold that kids, like, they go to school and know like, oh, you have to sit through a lesson. You like broke away from the norm, and you like let them into your life. You like pulled away the curtain and said like, come on, help me out, you guys have got all the info, come assist me. And in that instance, you won them over for life.
Yeah, it was fun. For
Yeah,
sure. It's stuff, those are the moments that I miss for sure.
yeah, no. So now you made the transition into entrepreneurship. Now, we've started a recruitment company for teachers called Go Teach. So for all the teachers listening out there, I appreciate it if you can go and check out www.goteach.co.za to go and find the awesome job for yourself. But one of the things I'm obsessed with is trying to identify what those traits are that employers are looking for. Now, I'm sure there are transferable skills in education and outside of education. But when you work with people, when you employ people in your business, what are the traits that you're looking for?
Yeah, it's such a loaded one. It really depends on the job. The easy one to answer, I think, is more of that they're proficient in that skill. Like the way that my company works, we're doing full service podcast production most of the time, and the way that we've structured our team is that everybody's a specialist in their own right, and so we have like formal producers, editors, copywriters, audio editors, audio engineers, musicians, like all the different pieces, and then depending on the project we go, okay, I need person ABC on this one, I need person CDE on this one, and we kind of just structure our teams out that way to fill in the gaps. And so the easy thing to answer is that whatever I'm hiring for, they really should be skilled. Like they should be an expert to the best of their abilities in that particular thing, whether it's design or whatever it is. So that's the pretty simple one. However, the characteristics that will be kind of the more determining factors for me. Like it's just like a you need to be proficient in the thing that you're getting hired for. Um, but there are traits that I'm even willing to compromise on that if I'm seeing things like curiosity, uh, ownership, self-direction. Like it's a lot of these things that I feel like are harder to teach or would take a significant amount of time to teach. And so it's like I just don't have the bandwidth to instill those qualities. It's things that we often learn. And it's for those of us that are like active listeners who are aware, who just care and are curious, who are ambitious in these kinds of ways is one thing. And then those are some of like maybe those internal ones. But then there's also an element too, where I'm more or less thinking of it now now that I'm talking out loud about it, is there needs to be an element of community as well. Like you need to be just I don't know, a nice person. Like there needs to, like you need to be enjoyable at least somewhat. Like we don't have to everybody on our team isn't like buddy friends, but for those of us that are sort of more in the trenches and on our leadership team and that kind of part of it, like we get along very well. Like we care about almost what we were saying a minute ago. Like we care about each other. Like we have professional relationships, but we care about each other personally. We're easy to get along with. Like we'll send each other stupid gifs or like whatever we're doing because we all work remote. Like I have one of my people I'll throw under the bus right now. He's really notorious about not invoicing me on time, and so I just sent him a gif of like this weird cartoon character just sitting on the bed, and it's like waiting, and I didn't give it any context, and I'm waiting for him to go, what is that for? And then I'm gonna say me waiting for your invoice. But it's like stuff like that. Like I'm looking for those kinds of traits in the people that I want part of my team.
Do you think that the world of entrepreneurship and maybe like the smaller companies as opposed to major corporates is a lot more informal and relaxed? And then in the same breath, when we like compare that to schools, who typically traditionally is a lot more conservative space to work in, do you find a difference between that?
Will you what am I comparing? Am I comparing small business to corporate, or how to can you phrase that for me?
Yeah, maybe I should rephrase the question. Like the company culture, like what you've just mentioned around the gifts and the like the memes and stuff that you share, that's quite an informal uh, communication, informal relationship. But in schools, and if you wish, corporate businesses, there could easily be a traditional, conservative, like almost a lot more professional culture. Do you find that that is the case, or how would you compare?
Well, let me maybe clarify because for me, I'll speak just personally for the time being. There's clear lines and foundations that need to be had, and like even though I'm saying some of these things, that do matter to me personally. I just pulled up our company site, and there's 4 principles that we follow. We follow, just for context, we follow EOS as kind of our underlying framework for the company, and it's helped us do some different things. And so I have definitions of each one of these, but our 4 like principles that everyone, this is how you're held accountable. Like if you're not doing these things, this is the thing that could get you kind of quote unquote fired. And the same applies to me. Every single person on the team is weighted in the same way, and so it's not super objective. It's charity, expertise, intentionality, and integrity. And so this becomes the foundational building block. And within each one of those things, there's expectations, like we're getting the work done, we're making sure the client is happy, and they're very clear about things, we communicate well. So there's like all these underlying principles, and those are happening. And it's not like we're willy-nilly or anything, or we're like super loose as a team. It's like we're getting our crap done, and because we're getting our crap done, that allows us the ability to enjoy it as well, and to have some freedom, and to be flexible, and really just to be human. Like everybody knows they need to come and bring their best, but at the same time, like stuff happens. Like I have family issues come up with people that are working for me, and they're like, I can't do this thing, and I'm like, all right, I got you covered, don't worry about it, go take care of your dad or whatever it is. And it's like there's that give and take, and that's where, again, like we're say like the charity comes in, where things happen and you roll with it. And so I don't know. I don't know if I'm answering your question totally, because I feel like there is an element that is more that work, but then there's an element that it's like we're still people, and we have a lot of complexity to each one of us, and we should be able to have the liberty to have fun and that kind of a thing.
And that, I think, that's a superb answer, because I believe that that kind of attitude is needed within schools. I think for too long, schools have fallen into this traditional conservative trap of, this is a place of education. This is a place where people learn. We're going to be like uber professional to such an extent that the humanity is lost, that we don't see each other as human beings anymore with our own challenges at home, but that everybody's expecting you, like you have to be in your A game every single day. And if you're not, you're like, you're disappointing the kids, you're disappointing the parents, you're disappointing. So I think schools can easily fall into that trap. And what I'm hearing from you here is that having a set of values that become the foundation of all of your interactions is worth a lot towards company culture.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's hard because like when you talk about values and principles, it's really easy to just say stuff and not mean it. But these things, like I don't care if people believe me or not. Like these are at our core, and it's something that we developed as a leadership team. Like these are things that are personal to me, that I'm going to do regardless. Like it doesn't matter what job I'm doing. It doesn't matter. Like it just, they've become the company culture, because they're very much my culture, and they're very much what our team can rally behind. We spend a fair amount of time defining them the way that we have. And when I think about it in the teaching settings, like I remember some of that. And part of when I left, and part of the reason I left was because of the some of the pushback I was getting from the new administration. And I remember pretty distinctly, like I just gave some of those examples of the way that I taught, and I taught like that frequently. And I was very much more like, you have like some of the people that'll be more like, okay, the drills, like you're saying, or the basal readers, and we're just going to go through the textbooks verbatim, and we're going to answer the really poorly worded questions at the end of each section, and all this garbage. And it's very frustrating, because that's not the real world. And so we would bake in as much as we can, like the kids' experience, my experience, what's actually happening, look at real world events, be able to look back at history. I mean, it was everything from like researching modern day stuff at the time, to reading like Beowulf with my kids, or Animal Farm, and like all these different things, and then applying it to like, well, look at these, all the different things that big tech's doing right now. It's like all this nonsense. And to get the pushback of like, no, you have to teach this other way, was terribly frustrating. And it was even in the evidence of like the way that our kids, that our students were held accountable. Like my classes did amazing on their tests, and I'm like, look at, like I have like, not only do I hate the test that they're getting ready for or whatever, but they're like outperforming everybody else with the style that we're taking. So please don't try to tell me that I have to go back to this Basil reader and read verbatim, the kids are all going to die. Like they're going to just die on the inside, figuratively, not literally. And it's not okay. So yeah, I think I'm hearing you there.
So, what I think is a major issue is this gap between the practicing teachers in the trenches and what administrators and what policymakers are suggesting should be done. And that gap is creating a lot of frustration within the system, and causing us to lose amazing teachers like Jeff Lodge to entrepreneurship and starting their own business, because these type of frustrations, I mean, that's the reason why I left. There's a lot of frustration in the education sphere because we don't grant teachers the autonomy that's needed so that they can use their superpowers intuitively in the classroom.
It's almost a catch-22 though, because it's like I mean, it's hard because every step is further removed. Like sometimes you get administrators, at least when you have the administrators that were teachers, like they're a little closer to it. And so they typically remember. Maybe they don't do it still, but at least they remember. But as you continue moving up the field, it's the worst when you have people coming in, especially on a policy side, and then all of a sudden our administrators, their hands are bound, and then it just all trickles down to you on the ground level. And it's like, you're not getting listened to. So yeah, it's tough because the autonomy is equally needed for our students as it is our teachers. Like I understand the fact that we need principles and guiding factors and like curriculum, and I'm not saying that we should just go crazy and do whatever we want, but I am saying if we don't respect people, period, on an individual level, like it's going to be a problem if we're not respecting our teachers and their opinions with things. If we're not respecting our students as teachers, like it's there's just all kinds of problems that are going to arise from that.
Well, I'm glad we're on the same page there. But while I have got an expert on podcast production on the show, I want to run an idea past you. Now, I'm a firm believer that every single school should have their own podcast and or YouTube show. So podcast not only in the audio version but also in the video version. Just based on that premise alone, without any context, what do you think about it?
Well, I have many thoughts. I'm gonna focus more on the concept of a podcast for a school. This, funny enough, is an idea that we tested as a target market for our company because for me, especially in the States, the marketing and promotion campaigns for most of our colleges, I'll focus on the colleges at this point, is all relatively the same. It's like billboards of a smiling college student and they're bettering their future. The problem that I have is that it's not those billboards don't sell those colleges. I just don't understand even why like any of that stuff. Like I guess you get to a threshold in your marketing that you're just looking for awareness and potential. It's really not any more than just awareness. And it's not until like there's something else in the funnel that can help you move down the funnel and become a student. But instead, it's the stories that are associated with the schools, and there's so much from a cultural standpoint happening on each campus or even each individual school within the administration, within the staff, within the students, within the organizations and the different things that are going on that doesn't get conveyed. And if you had something like a podcast or some sort of like docu-series of the school, you're able to share these ideas and highlight the niches and highlight what is unique in a way that's very personal, especially when you start talking about podcasting. If you do it well, to be able to tell a story in that capacity, and you're gonna find things where it's like, oh wow, that's super exciting. Like I really would love to get involved with X, or I want to know more about this teacher that is doing this thing on a national level or that pioneered this other thing. And so to me, from more of a marketing angle, the targeting that we did kind of fell flat. Like we had a couple schools reach out to us because of it and then ultimately decide against it. And I don't know if it was more of a budget problem or what it was, but to me, it's like a no-brainer. It's like a no-brainer that even on a school level to highlight what is going on is a big deal. And then even when you take it down to say some of the primary grades, it gets a little dicey depending on the laws in terms of like the media laws with the kids and how much they can be involved and shown and like releases and that kind of a thing. So you have to remember the legal aspect of it. But to get the children to take initiative on these projects is so empowering, that in and of itself. To I look back to my own, what started me on this entire trajectory of caring about tech at all was ninth grade. I had a teacher invest in me and get me like make a big recommendation for me to get into a telecommunications program at our school. And that started with just me learning about like video equipment, and then it moved into me running the local TV station. And like I remember, we talk about like the moments we remember, our students remember of us. I remember from my teacher, like she gave out these little fake Oscar awards, and she didn't know what to give me because I was a jack of all trades, and so she gave me the best at everything award. And it's not like, hey, look at me, but it was just the fact that I loved it. Like I loved it, and whenever there was a problem, I'd figure out how to do it, and that kind of a thing. And so when we can create those, when we can create that atmosphere for our kids too, I don't know. There was a really long answer to just, it's a no-brainer. Like I don't understand why we're not at least entertaining the idea, especially when you can do it well, when you have the capacity to do it well. Like it just seems like a given.
I'm with you there. I absolutely feel that every single school should have a podcast. And instead of having a weekly assembly, you can have a weekly podcast where all the information that you wanted to share in the assembly can get into either the podcast or a newsletter format, or like that kind of content. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be produced by the teaching staff or the principal. It can be like the school newspaper committee of old that can become the new like content creation hub of the school, run by the kids if it is possible.
Yeah, I mean, like you can do this stuff with just, I mean, you hear all the backlash against it, but I mean, it's like you could have just a couple $100 worth of equipment. Like, I mean, I have a course that we run, and we teach business owners how to do this on their own. It's kind of like our done with you version. I supply them equipment, and you wouldn't even need everything that I supply. And I mean, you could get away with literally like $400. Like if you could find $400 somewhere, like the worst case scenario, what, just have a couple parents rally together. Like, I mean, there's ways to do this, and you'd have some basic equipment to be able to start doing this type of thing. And I think it is too often. Uh, I think it was you and I talking beforehand. You were saying like when we have a high expectation, the kids will often rise to it. I think it's too often that we don't give the students the credit that they really deserve. Another thing that I did while I was teaching is I ran our talent show for years. And we organized it, and I had my kids, like it was a legit, like a legit production. And I had a group of students that would, not only like the students that would be part of the talent show, but I had a group of students that were kind of like the stagehands, and they ran it. Like I just oversaw it to make sure things were doing what they were supposed to be, but the kids ran it. And it's like anytime I gave the students an opportunity to rise to the occasion in that regard, whether it was difficult or not, I mean, they did. Like the ones that cared did. And so it's hard when we discredit them out of the gate just because it's like, oh, a podcast would be too hard, or whatever it is. It's like, no, there's so many ways to do this nowadays, like from very inexpensive and not complicated. Yeah, it's a no-brainer on my end.
So one of the challenges with creating podcasts is ensuring that you've got enough content for the episodes, and of course that the content is interesting enough that it's worthy of people's attention. So can I challenge you to give us maybe an idea of content? Let's say, for instance, let's take an amount of episodes, maybe like a series. What would you typically for a school suggest could be the content of a podcast series?
And you're making me do discovery work in the matter of minutes. This is a very unrealistic request, Francois. Um, okay, two angles. On one hand, it's what you said, and it's not even about podcasts. It's like, can this meeting be something else? It's like as an administrator, you have to ask yourself that. Can this meeting be an email? Can this meeting be a newsletter? Can I save gathering my whole staff here for this extended amount of time to like a one-page PDF? If so, do that and save them the time, because guaranteed they're working on a million other things at any moment. And then in that note, if you have information that gets conveyed frequently, another way to think about it is, if you say you are somebody higher level, even like maybe you start getting into superintendent type level or something like that, where you're very limited in your capacity to have one-on-ones, but you really want to share your ideas. An internal podcast for a school, for the staff, can become a fantastic solution for some of that. You see business leaders doing it all the time now. It's a very frequent occurrence for the executive team or CEOs to be able to record something that happens on a weekly basis for their staff to teach initiatives and culture and these different values that are important. And you're hearing it directly in your earbuds from that individual. So that's like a really easy approach. On the other end, I'll give the framework of, at least like, people care about stories and journeys. And if you are starting an initiative, if you're like, there's so many things you could do. It's like anything that's just going on at the school. Like if you're talking about the new season, the new sports season's going on, and you get some students working together of like documenting how the team's doing and the practices that they're having, and then they have their first game, and then you get the reaction to their first game, and like you can do things like that. Or if there's a science olympiad type thing coming up, and the people are prepping to show those journeys, whether it's like over the course of an episode or over the course of several episodes, that is going to give the kids like all this creative freedom to become like just people that are they're creating something. I mean, it's story. So like literature people are going to be really care about this stuff. We're talking like almost kind of think of it very, very much like movie making and like directing and like all of these skills that are super necessary to be able to pull that stuff off, and to allow the kids to explore what's interesting to them or what they're learning. Like you have a new initiative in class of this project you're going to start on, and you document it that way. Or I don't know. It's hard like off the cuff like this, but I would de facto to, where are the stories and where are the journeys that we can go on with them?
And that's why you're the expert on this. I knew it was going to be a difficult on the spot question, but I think that's such a valuable answer. And I think the reason why I'm so comfortable asking you this is because schools are such a rich environment for stories.
Hmm.
If I would suggest a series for a podcast, is the Get to Know the Teacher podcast series. I mean, that could
Hmm.
be a 10, 20-minute interview with the teacher, and not asking them anything about actually their teaching, but getting to know the individual. If we're saying that we want to build relationships, this is a practical way of doing it. And like every week interviewing another staff member. I mean, that gives you, depending on the size of the school, that could give you 40 to 70 different episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even and then you take it, I don't know what your intent is, but it's like, have the class, like the homeroom of that teacher or the teacher's students, like they're the ones that write the questions. And then one of the kids is the host. Like the kid is the one asking these questions. And there's so much stuff. Like it's just like this ridiculous wealth of potential content. And immediately I kind of like laugh in my head, because it's like, if I can work with a law firm talking about like family defense law, or like a marketing firm that specializes in just home services, and make really successful podcasts out of those concepts, like I'm pretty sure you can find one about the cool stuff that's happening at your school. Like unless you have the worst school ever, which probably isn't the case, like you're going to have some potential stories there.
I think one of the things for a podcast is finding an audience to actually listen to the content. I think people in schools are really invested in their school. They're already part of the community. So, I mean, like with any other podcast series, you're not really going to like all of the episodes, but because it is within your environment, is within your school, in your community, at least you'll have a big majority of the school listening.
Yeah, and I don't, and I think to back that up even, it's like, it's not about if people like it or downloads at this point. What it's about is what your goal is. And it sounds like, I mean, so much of this stuff, and what I think we miss, and this is me kicking back over into business mode for a second, is that we do these things, like we get an idea, like you see it a lot in writing, people who blog. It's like they'll have an idea, and they'll go out and they write about it, and then they just wait and they wonder like, oh, why didn't that get any traffic or whatever? And it's like, there was no like goal to begin with. You didn't know who you were talking to. Like, you just woke up with an idea and wrote about it. And the same's true with podcasting, where it's like you have to define your goals. And if your goal is to create culture around a school, or if your goal is, like you're saying, to be able to get to know the staff better, or to whatever it is, that's what you have to balance what success looks like. It's not like you're not going out there to make the new like true crime podcast and get a bunch of sponsorships. You're doing something different in this scenario, and what success looks like will be significantly different than, say, these traditional methods that a lot of people like to apply to podcasting.
Do you think that a podcast for a school can be ROI positive on a financial level?
What kind of school are we talking about? Primary or college or what?
I'd go primary school, high school.
Well, private or public?
Okay, so immediately in your question there, the private schools, we know they would be able to do that. In our public school system, I think finding the funding in the first place is going to be a challenge with that. But if you want to diversify and split between the two, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with a private school. Yeah, because if they're getting paid, I mean, you make a good representation of the school. It indirectly or directly becomes a marketing avenue. You're showing off those interiors. This is what I was talking about earlier. Like, anytime that you are able to showcase the thing you're doing and have it turn into leads, yes, there's 100% potential to make and exceed whatever, get an ROI return in that regard. With a public school setting, it becomes different. And that's when it's like, we're not really talking about finances anymore. We're talking about other things. Like maybe it's just retention of the students. Maybe it's engagement of the students. Maybe it is engagement of the parents or even the staff. Like again, that's where we start to look at what is the goal of it. And then you need to be able to craft your content in a way that it can get you to that goal. And so I would say absolutely, but probably not in the same way that we traditionally think of ROI in terms of money. It's going to become another currency that we're dealing with instead of just dollars or rand in our case.
Awesome, Jeff. I think that there's a lot being said during today's episode, and I think there's a lot of value for teachers out there. Final word from your side before we close out.
I mean, I just thank you. I thank you, general thank you to the teachers out there. As one myself, I think it can be an undervalued trade, and there is a piece of me that still misses it. I miss the kids a lot, and so to be able to have a conversation like this just reminds me how hard it can be, but at the same time, it just hopefully a word of encouragement. Like, you're doing good work that you might not see the benefits of. It took me a long time, even years after I was done, before I'd run into students later and like you said, start to get some of that shade in a good way put back on me. And so just keep up the good work. Even on the tough days, being a teacher is like a very noble and awesome trade.
Jeff Large, thank you very much for spending time with us. You are a super teacher.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's show. I hope that you found value and that your classroom or your boardroom is now a better place to work at. Please go check out the website staysuper.co.za to find out how my keynotes, workshops, or mastermind can assist you in teaching like a superhero. Until I see you in person or chat with you online, stay super.